And hello everyone, welcome back to another C++ tutorial. So in the previous tutorial we talked about inheritance and more object-oriented stuff. In this tutorial we'll kind of be covering more OOP, but also in a sense not more OOP. So let's get started. First of all, I want to talk about constants. Now a constant is a variable that cannot be changed. For example, let's say I have a variable int x and I make it equal to 10. Now I go cout and I say give me x. Then I go down here and I say x is equal to 19. And if I say cout give me x, then you'll notice it changes. So just cpal this 10 and 19. So sometimes you don't want this to be possible. Sometimes you just want the variable to store a value, but you don't ever want that value to be changed unless you specifically go and change that value in the code itself. To give an example of what I mean, we can say, here in front of this int, we can say const int. And this means make this x variable a constant. You'll notice we immediately get an error because this x here is being changed. And here it says expression must be a modifiable value. And x cannot be modified anymore because it's a constant. So if I were to try and run this, I'll get an error because you cannot change x. It has already been set. So I now have to remove that because I cannot change it. Now if I run it, it works perfectly fine. But x cannot be changed. You can still kind of change it in the code here, for example, x plus 9. That's still something you can do. It's not going to stop you. The variable x itself, however, cannot be changed. Now, let's quickly talk about naming conventions as well. Usually, you'd have something such as int my variable. And let's say that's 10, right? When you have a constant, you can do this. There's no problem with it, but a lot of people like to go int my constant is equal to 10. So this is just for kind of you to know when you're accessing a constant and when you are accessing a variable. Because a variable will use camel case and it starts with a lowercase letter. And a constant will be all caps, and to separate words you'll use an underscore. So this is just kind of a naming convention. You don't have to follow it, but a lot of people do because it makes the code easier to understand. Because you'll know constants. If it's a constant, you just say const here. But anyhow, constants will be all caps, and normal variables that can be mutated will not be. Anyhow, that's just some naming conventions you might want to know of. Another way you can define, let's actually just remove this class here. Another way you can define a constant is up here by saying hashtag define, and you just give it a constant. For example, my name, and then what value you want to give it. In this case, let's say Steve. And then of course I can use it here. And I can just say my name. If I run this, it shouldn't give any errors. As you can see, Steve. Now let's get to the object-oriented side of things. Let's create a class and call it car. It can have a private variable, which maybe contains like the int x, or let's actually go map. Let's create a map. Int x, and then mutable int 1. I'll explain this in a second. And you can of course have public, which can be our functions, get position, which will, or actually let's make the set position to make things easier. Set position, and this will be void. And let's put a const here. So this is going to be a constant function. And I'll explain all of this in a second. Now this function here is a constant function. Basically, when you declare a constant function, it tells the class that it will not change any of the variables in the class. So if the class in this case has the variable x, we are not allowed to modify x. However, what we could do is we could use mutable, and this means it's allowed to be modified inside of a constant function. Let me implement this function to show you. So here, let's say we go cout, and we can print out x, and then also y, and we go y. So currently it just prints out the things, it doesn't do anything. Then here we can just say map my map, and then you can just say my map dot set positions. Now if we run this, we'll get our x and we'll get our y, which is just random values because they were never actually set. So let's actually give them default values just so they have something. Let's go 10, and here we can go 15. Now it'll be a bit more understandable. So x is 15 and then y is 10. Cool. Now when we try and modify x, because this is a constant function, it's not going to allow itself to modify anything that is not mutable. So basically everything here is by default then a constant to this function. It cannot be changed. So if I want to go this, and then x is equal to 10, it's going to give us an error because we are not allowed to change x because we're in a constant function. If we go x or this, and then y is equal to 100, it will do it without a problem because y has been set to mutable, so it's allowed to be mutated inside of a constant function. So if we try and run this, we'll get an error because x is not allowed, because it's not mutable. But if we were to comment this out and rerun it, we won't get any problems, and y would have been changed, as you can see in this output, because y is mutable. Nice. Now this brings me to another topic. Let's say we have const int y here instead. Remove that, and here we can also remove that. We can actually keep x. Yeah, like it is. So now we have a constant variable here, not a mutable variable, not a normal variable, but a full-blown constant variable, meaning it's not allowed to be edited anywhere inside of this class. It has to stay like this. Functions are not allowed to edit it. Constant functions are not allowed to edit it. It has to stay like this. Now, we have a problem. Let's just do this, and we can actually now call this get pos because this will just get the positions for us. Here you can say get pos. Now, when we create a constructor for this, let's say we create a void map, which will be the constructor. And it can just take an int x and int y to set x and y. And this will be constructor. Actually, this shouldn't have anything because it's a constructor. There we go. And then down here, we can just go map and then pass in 10 and 9. This can be your x and y position. Let's make this 9t. Now, we have a little problem here. We cannot go this, or we cannot go this and then y is equal to y. And we cannot go, or we can go this, x is equal to x. This is possible, but this is not possible. Because remember, y is a constant. So how are we going to set y if y is a constant? Well, C++ actually has a very special method for doing this if you ever want to do it. So let's remove that, and we can just go here and say colon, then the variable name, in this case x, and we can say x that's been passed in. And then here we can say y, and then the y that's been passed in. Let's maybe just rename this to easier values so we don't struggle figuring out which one is which. So we can just say a and b. And this right here allows us to set the value of a constant variable. So in this case where we have to set the value, we can do this to set it instead. So now if we were to run this code, we'll get 10 and 90 because that's what we put in here. So this here allows us to mutate a constant variable if we need to. Because sometimes you only want to give it its value once you create it. You don't want to then change it later, but you want to give it the value once you create the object. You don't want to necessarily set the value as a constant when you have the class, like in the code. You might want to do it only once you call it. But yeah, that's the basics of constants in C++. There's a lot to go around, but for the most part, you just need to know constants are generally not immutable, meaning you cannot edit them. Once you've set them, that's what they're going to be until the end of time. And for the most part, if the class constants confuse you, then don't use them. Just go const here and then create your constant here. Or just go const here and just give it a default value if you don't want to use this here. Or if you don't need to use this here. And yeah. That's the basics of constants in C++. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you all again in the next C++ tutorial.